Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, August 8th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about Michigan. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh just got a punishment from the NCAA. Did not have to do with the sign-stealing scandal, but I want to break down that a little bit and give you guys an idea of why you never really know who's going to know, but at the end of the day, it'll definitely be one of those things that will affect Michigan for quite some time to come. Then we'll get into a little bit of fall camp intel. We'll bounce around to a number of different places. Some injuries are starting to roll in, so obviously that part of camp is starting to kind of come around. Then we'll get into the players that have to make the most of camp. We have 6 more teams for you. We'll likely finish this out tomorrow, I believe. Then we'll get into a little bit of a recruiting update, a couple of big-time commitments yesterday, as well as a ton of buzz around some quarterbacks possibly flipping in the coming days and weeks. Then we'll get into conference questions. We'll get into the ACC today and break down some of my biggest questions going into that conference that is going to be all over the place this upcoming year. But before we start, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the Tip and Donation link at the bottom of the screen. Also on the Sports Network page, you can use the super chat for YouTube. You can put super thanks. You can put whatever you'd like in there, and I will absolutely have it on the show. So another fun feature for you guys to get a little bit more involved here. But if you want to use the Tip and Donation link, that is gsmcpodcast.net. And if you want to use the super chat, it should be right there below this video. But let's jump in and let's talk about Michigan. And there is a ton of updates around Michigan and a ton of talk around Michigan, obviously, as this starts to unfold. And one of the big things that happened yesterday was Jim Harbaugh was given a punishment. And this has nothing to do with the sign-stealing scandal. This has to do with the recruiting violations known as Cheeseburger Gate. So definitely a very another thing added to the Michigan pile of allegations and things going on around that university. And there's a lot of different things that people have kind of pulled from the last couple of days. And the biggest thing I think I've found is everyone wants to know who knew, who didn't know. And I think that's obviously a normal response. I don't think there's any question that a lot of people want to know, did Jim Harbaugh know all the details of this sign-stealing scandal? Did he know everything that was going on? And it sounds like, at least according to him, he did not. So I want to break down this quote for you. He was asked about it at Chargers minicamp, talking about the NOA that the NCAA sent out to Michigan and said, never lie, never cheat, never steal. I was raised with this lesson. I have raised my family with that lesson. I have preached that lesson to my teams that I have coached. No one's perfect. If I stumble, you apologize and you make it right. Today, I do not apologize. I did not participate, was not aware or complicit in those allegations. So for me, it's back to work, attacking each day with enthusiasm unknown to mankind, as he usually says. But Jim Harbaugh is denying this outright. He is saying he had no knowledge of what was going on in the sign-stealing scandal, and obviously he has already gotten punished for the recruiting violations, which we'll get into here in a second, are a little bit ridiculous, but we'll get into that in here in a second. But I do think it's very interesting. Obviously, everyone wants to know who knew. Everyone wants to know, did Jim Harbaugh make this a thing? Did he kind of order this to happen? Did he just was totally in the dark? Frankly, I would lean a little bit more towards he didn't fully understand what was going on. I understand that, you are a head football coach, you are someone in the NCAA, you should know the rules and be able to point out when someone is breaking those rules. So it's not necessarily like him not knowing is a big defense of him, because he should know. That's his program, and there was something going on that was going to put his program in danger. Not knowing that is a whole other problem. But there are also some people arguing that this is just entirely a lie. He totally knew what was going on. He totally understood what was going on. And, well, I'm kind of in between on that. I'm not necessarily sure what the what's going on there and, who all knew and how this kind of played out. But more than anything else, I think the biggest thing here is what happens to Jim Harbaugh does not affect Michigan going forward. So as much as I want to know who knew, as much as I'm interested in all of the different stories that could come out of this thing, and absolutely we'll update you guys when we get them, it doesn't affect college football. It doesn't affect this Michigan program going forward, because he was just handed down a suspension for a year and a 4-year show cause, and there's no real reason for it. He's in the NFL now. He has a 4-year deal with the Chargers. He's not going anywhere for 4 years. And if he ever does come back to college, which he's not going to, let's just be totally honest, it wasn't going to happen before this punishment was handed down. It's definitely not going to happen now. So I can't imagine he is going to be the head coach of any college football program going forward. So frankly, I don't really care what his punishment is. I understand that this is the guy at the head of the snake. This is the guy that everyone wants to know all the gory details about, but the reality is he does not affect Michigan anymore. He was a part of that university, and yes, some of the things that he did could affect that university, but I'm not worried about any punishments that are just handed down to Jim Harbaugh, particularly this last one, because frankly, it's goofy. You're suspending a guy for a year. You're once he finally does come back to college football in this hypothetical world that the NCAA has conjured up in their mind, and he also has a 4-year show cause. He's not going to have to use that. It doesn't matter. He's one of those guys that, it would matter if he was still the head coach of Michigan. But frankly, if he was still the head coach of Michigan, the NCAA wouldn't have given him this punishment. I think they saw an opening to say, we have someone that we know is not really going to get affected by this. We can throw down what looks like a really aggressive hammer and still have a guy get off scot-free. And it makes us look tough, but you're not actually being tough. So I said it yesterday, I believe, on my Twitter, where I just said this is the perfect encapsulation of what the NCAA is all fluff. There's not really there's not fear that's put around by the NCAA that gets into the hearts of really anyone in college football at this point. They are very much a kind of overseeing eye that no one's really scared of. And it's one of those things that I understand, you don't want to push these guys into really tough positions and you don't want to create a weird environment in the NCAA, but you have to have rules and you have to have a system where a head coach of one of the major universities in the country can't just say no, and that's the end of the conversation, because that's essentially what happened here. They can hand out whatever punishment they want. The reality is Michigan just stood there, said, we're not complying with anything you're doing, and it sounds like what they're going to get off with is a big-time fine and possibly their head coach being suspended for the first couple of games this season. So it's not like they made the wrong decision. I'm having a hard time sitting here and saying Michigan did everything wrong here and Michigan should have complied with the investigation, because the reality is the most people that have complied with NCAA investigations get really bad penalties, and the ones that don't get off pretty nicely. So the reality is Michigan handled this the same way that your favorite team would have handled it, the same way my favorite team would have handled it, and we would be in the shoes that every Michigan fan is in right now. We would be in the shoes of saying it didn't matter that much, which I don't necessarily fully agree with, and I'll get into that in here in a second, but we would be Michigan fans. And then on the other side, Michigan fans would be coming at Ohio State fans, or Oklahoma fans would be coming at Texas fans, because that's what we do. That's what college football is in a lot of different ways. So getting into kind of how much this mattered, how much the sign stealing and all of this different stuff going on around Michigan really mattered in their quest to win a national title. You can't tell me that it didn't matter. I refuse to believe that there's anyone out there that believes that understanding that play action is coming, or understanding that there's going to be a number of players running crossing routes into your zone, thinking that doesn't give you a huge advantage, is insane to me. I understand that you still have to execute the play. I understand you still have to make the tackle. Knowing that the running back that is getting the fake handoff is not getting the fake handoff is a leg up that they should not have. That's just the reality. And although Connor Stallions was gone for the back end of that season, and frankly, it's not to take anything away from that team, because it was a remarkable team. They did a number of really incredible things down the stretch of that season. They had 15 guys off to the NFL. They had so many different things go their way and so many great things about that team. It doesn't change that a little bit of it is just a little bit tainted to me. And going back to kind of who all knew and how far up this went, I don't really know. I don't think we'll ever really get a satisfying answer to that question. I think we'll get rumors. I think we'll get, allegations. We won't get anything really concrete. And that's obviously a relatively frustrating thing as we kind of head into this new era of Michigan football and trying to figure out, how is Sherrone Moore going to deal with this, which is a whole other topic of conversation, where he got a job that should be a dream job that he can, catapult his career into, and he's gotten thrown pretty much every single hurdle you could possibly get thrown at him. So overall, I think it puts Sherrone Moore in probably the toughest spot of anyone. But kind of going back to Who all knew, who all didn't. We'll never get an answer. We'll never get what we want to get from that. What I will say is Sharon Moore and Jesse Minter are very good play callers. They're very smart people, and if Connor Stallions is standing behind them saying run cover 2 here, I think they'd be a little bit surprised. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm not necessarily saying that they absolutely knew what was going on. I would be surprised if they weren't a little bit skeptical of what was going on at the very least. So overall, I think, we can say what we want about Michigan. We can break them down. We can say that, they were totally cheating and that was the only thing that led to their success. It's not remotely true, but you're more than welcome to say that. Overall, I think when you're looking at what this future holds, we can talk about Jim Harbaugh until the crows rise. It doesn't matter overall how much we talk about Jim Harbaugh. That's the guy on the screen. He's the one leading the program. Sharon Moore is the one that is going to bear most of these results down the road, whether it's him getting suspended or his team not playing as well because there's so many distractions on the outside. This is the guy that's going to handle all that. This is the guy that shoulders it's going to fall on. And frankly, I think we can talk about whether it's fair or not that that's the case. But the reality is, I do think this is a person that we focus all this energy on Jim Harbaugh and on the past Michigan teams. I want to know all the answers that you guys do, but at the end of the day, I also want to know what's going to happen with Michigan going forward. And that's frankly what defines college football for me going forward, where you have a huge program that is being faced with, about as many hurdles as you possibly can be, and a lot of them were put there by themselves, don't get me wrong, but it definitely does put them in an interesting position going forward. So all in all, we can talk about Jesse Minter, we can talk about Sharon Moore, we can talk about Jim Harbaugh and how much they knew about Connor Stallions and how well they knew him and if they knew all of the things that were going on. I care about that for Sharon Moore. I don't necessarily care about that for Jim Harbaugh because he's no longer in college football. It doesn't affect Michigan, at least in the sense of if they're handing down a punishment to Jim Harbaugh, it doesn't affect Michigan. It absolutely could. Some of the different things that Jim Harbaugh did during that time to kind of make the NCAA mad, let's just be totally honest. So it's one of those things that I understand the questions are out there and we will want all of the answers. And I frankly want all the answers as well. But as I look more and more into this, as we get further and further down the road, I'm just trying to figure out where does Michigan sit right now? Where do they go forward from here? And I don't know if it's the greatest footing by any means, but it puts you in a spot where we can talk about this all we want. At some point, we're going to have to move forward. At some point, we're going to have to see what Michigan is going forward. And then maybe we can make some judgments after that if they start to fall back off. But the reality is that was a really talented team. They did steal signs. They did absolutely cheat, and they should be punished for that. But I watched them beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I watched them beat Washington in the national title. I didn't see Connor Stallions on the sideline, and I'll just leave it at that for the time being. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about fall camp intel. We have so many different things to break down. The sad part about this is a lot of them are injuries. We're getting to that time of year where some guys are getting injured, out for the season. Definitely a really tough time of year, but we'll break down all of the things you need to know on that front right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Michigan and all of the updates there. Jim Harbaugh just got a fairly pointless punishment to be suspended for 1 year if he ever does come back to college football. he's never coming back to college football. So that's kind of the end of that. But let's get into segment 2 and let's talk about some fall camp intel. This is the time of year where they start to put pads on all around the country, and that means some injuries start to follow. Obviously, the really tough time of this year where a lot of teams lose some big time players. And let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's start with the team out in Austin, Texas. They lost a huge player in Cedric Baxter. CJ Baxter. CJ Baxter is a very talented running back, started for them as a freshman before going down with a little bit of an injury, and Jonathan Brooks just entirely taking over that season at running back. He injured his LCL and PCL during practice on Tuesday. He is likely going to require surgery and is going to be out between 6 and 9 months. So a huge blow for this Longhorns team. When you talk about who they have after him, I apologize, I'm on the wrong thing. When you talk about who they have after him, you have a kid like Jaden Blue who is very, very talented. The speed is out of this world. He hits a hole and he's pretty much gone the second that he does. So he's a very, very talented kid. I don't think they're worried too much about the drop-off between their number 1 running back. I think they're worried about the number 2. So where you had Jaden Blue was the number 2 running back. Now you have Trey Wisner likely making a little step up. That is definitely a little bit of gap between those two players. Also, Jared Gibson stepping up into possibly that third running back role. He was in the 4th spot, so that's definitely a little bit of shuffling around in that running back room. I do think they have the guys to make this work, but one of the big time things to watch is CJ Baxter was comfortably the best pass pro running back on this team. They need to find someone to kind of replace that void because Quinn Ewers is going to need time. And if he has time, then he can dissect a defense, but he's going to need that time, and they're going to need to find a running back that can do pass pro. But on the bright side of things, they love this wide receiver core. There was some questions about bringing in 3 new guys for 3 really talented guys that just left your program. Doesn't always work out the way you want. It sounds like it's working out, at least thus far, the way that Texas wants right now. They have so many different guys to plug in. Silas Bowling continues to get ridiculous reviews, so everything seems to be going right on that side of things, and subsides a little bit of worry that some Texas fans had going into the season about just how these wide receivers are going to fit into this offense. But A&M I want to move on to, stay in the state of Texas, but Nick Scourton, that guy right there, is making all of the headlines in College Station right now. He is obviously showing off his ridiculous athletic ability, came over from Purdue this past offseason, and is a huge player for them at the edge position. They need to get pressure on these quarterbacks, and frankly, I think this is likely going to be the number 1 guy to pull that off. On the quarterback position, Connor Wegman looks absolutely incredible, apparently. He is not throwing against big-time defenses yet. Obviously, we will get scrimmages here pretty soon. Likely this weekend, I think, is when they start around the country. So we'll get much more details around that in the coming days and weeks. But overall, he is the quarterback 1. He is as comfortable as possibly can be in that offense as of right now. And then you have a kind of a battle for quarterback number 2. Jalen Henderson and Marcel Reed are both very talented players. They're going to need a backup ready because, as we saw last year, Connor Wegman did go down with an injury. Obviously hoping that doesn't happen, but you want to make sure you have a guy right there to pick up the pieces if you need it. Depth at wide receiver seems to be something that they're not overly confident in College Station. I think Jabri Barber is someone that came over from Troy, and he's out with a foot injury right now, so doesn't necessarily give them a great guy below their top 4 or below their top 3. So I do think they have a great top 3 when you talk about Jade Walker, when you talk about Noah Thomas. I think they have guys to make plays, but you're going to need a lot of depth, and maybe you have to get a couple of young guys to make some big-time plays, but definitely something to watch as A&M heads into the season. Nebraska had a really, really tough hit to their offensive line. The left tackle, Teddy Prohaka, got injured. He is going to be out for the entire season. This marks the 3rd time that he's been injured for an entire season since 2021. Obviously, terrible luck for a very talented kid. Hope he gets healthy as soon as possible and gets back on the field, but a huge blow for this Nebraska offense. We'll talk about who's replacing him and how he needs to have a huge couple of weeks here in the next segment. But the other thing I want to talk about around Nebraska kind of ties to the other one is Dylan Raiola is absolutely cooking. Apparently, he is doing everything they want and more to kind of take this job and run away with it. So his connection to Jamal Banks, it sounds like it's getting stronger and more dangerous by the day. So as long as they can work out that left tackle position with that new injury, I think this Nebraska offense could be off running this upcoming year, especially with a guy like Raiola calling all the plays, or calling all the shots, not calling the plays. But let's move over to Tennessee, and there's still a lot of players ramping up from injuries for Tennessee. When you have a couple of wide receivers, a couple of linemen, Dylan Sampson, the very talented running back, a couple of defenders as well, they're all trying to get healthy. It doesn't sound like any of them are overly serious, and they will be out there for week 1, but definitely something to watch as we head over the next couple of weeks over there in Knoxville. The one big-time injury that they did suffer was Jordan Thomas, the very talented nickelback that they have. It sounds like Boo Carter could be rolling in at that freshman, as a freshman into that position. That is a huge, huge question mark as you head into the season for this Tennessee back end. Plenty of talent back there. They can definitely make this work, but they're going to need some really big players to show up in huge ways early on. The D-line looks as solid as can possibly be, which obviously helps that back end be a little bit more maybe porous, but not necessarily see the results of that. So it's really strong, really deep. They like to rotate guys a ton out there, so they're definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with on that defensive line, and they very much need to as they head into this season for the SEC. And then you have a Clemson team that the wide receiver group looks really good. It looks like the Clemson team that we remember with all of the incredible wide receivers back in 2016. Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore are making so many highlights as a freshman duo. I think TJ Moore was one that they weren't necessarily sure how he fit into the offense. He showed up on campus and immediately started making plays. So he's going to fit into this offense just fine, and they're going to be a really explosive duo. I still kind of contend that, relying on 2 freshmen to make all of those plays on the outside is not necessarily the best way to go about business, but if you got to, you got to. And if they're ready to go, then you have no problem there. So it's 2 very, very talented kids. Cannot wait to see what they do this upcoming year. And then you have Peter Woods and this defensive line, dominant. They're going to be really, really good. Him, Peyton Page, a lot of really talented players around this team. But Peter Woods might be the outright most talented sophomore D lineman in the country. Now, there are plenty of good ones. There are so many guys, especially interior defensive linemen, that can really play some good football. But Peter Woods is an absolute beast and is going to make plenty of noise this upcoming year. It sounds like Dabo Swinney is as confident in this team as he has ever been. It sounds like this team he feels really, really good about. I think some of that is just instilling confidence in your kids, but a lot of that is this team looks a lot more like the Clemson team that we've seen over the past or over their dominance in the 2010s. So we'll break that down a little bit later in the show, but it sounds like Dabo is very, very confident. I do have my worries, but it sounds like everything is coming along pretty well over there. Michigan is one I want to talk about because the story is Alex Orji. He is making every single play. He is definitely pulling away with that starting job. Now, Jack Tuttle is still kind of recovering from a little bit of surgery, a little bit of rehab, so we'll see what happens there. That was obviously the story a couple of years ago when Cade McNamara won it over J.J. McCarthy in 2022, and then J.J. McCarthy got healthy, and things changed very quickly. I don't necessarily think that's going to be this case. I think Alex Orji is going to do plenty to keep this job, but it's definitely something to watch as you get into the season. I think one of the other things I want to unpack is the defensive line. It feels like that is a really, really good group. We know that the top line is going to be absolutely remarkable, but it sounds like Evan Link, a very talented sophomore, could be making a big-time stride there, a very long, athletic kid that could definitely get some run at the interior defensive line. And then Josiah Stewart, the guy on your screen, Sharon Moore says he's basically Josh Uche all over again. I think he is one of those guys that, as strong as can be, is one of those really elite pass rushers around the country and could be the guy that takes the biggest leap this upcoming season, and they might just need him to. With a guy like Braden McGregor walking out the door, you're definitely going to need some guys to step up, and Josiah Stewart might be the top of that list. And then you go to the back end, and there's some questions there. There are definitely some things they have to work out, especially with Rod Moore being out for the year with an injury. It sounds like Zeke Berry, a very talented safety, is stepping up in big-time ways. Jaden McBurrows is another guy they very much like. And then they have a couple of young guys that are really showing out in huge ways. So it feels like that back end is going to be more than fine. When you have Will Johnson, a lot of your problems are handled already, but getting that back end together, especially with Rod Moore going out, making sure you have someone to step in and take the reins and be confident in that person is obviously huge for that team. And then we'll go to their rivals over there, and it sounds like this is Will Howard's job. He's been pulling away pretty much every single day. He sounded like he pretty much every first team snap the last couple of days in practice, and the reason is not hard to find. He has been making tons of plays with his legs, and when you look at a Chip Kelly offense, you need that quarterback. You need that guy that is going to keep that defensive end honest, keep that linebacker honest, and make sure that you can get a running back like Travion Henderson or like Quinshon Judkins an opening to just run wild. So it's going to be a really, really fun offense. I do think the run game is going to be awesome to watch with especially Chip Kelly calling plays, but it sounds like it's Will Howard's job, and it's likely because of the athleticism he shows in that run game. And then you have Jack Sawyer. I want to talk about him for a second because this Ohio State team means business. They have not wavered from what their goal is this upcoming year. He said, "We're trying to win a national championship. Period. End of story." That is where their mind is at, and it sounds like from everyone around this program, that's where everyone's mind is at. They understand that going into this season, anything less is going to be a little bit of a disappointment for your fans, for you. So it's one of those things that they're setting the expectations high. They have every ability to meet those expectations. In fact, I have them meeting those expectations in winning the national title this year. But overall, they've said over on Bucknuts, Patrick Murphy, along with a couple other people, have said this might just be the best back end in the entire program history. When you add a guy like Caleb Downs and all of those different guys in the back end with Denzel Burke and Noah Igbinosun and all of those different guys back there, you're going to have tons of ability. And frankly, I'd be hard-pressed not to agree with them. There's so many dudes back there, and this entire team is just absolutely ridiculous, and they have the same goal. They're going to out to win a national title, and if they don't, it will be a disappointment for this Ohio State team. And then I want to talk about Montrell Johnson. He had an injury earlier on this week, I believe maybe into last week, where he had to get a little bit of arthroscopic surgery to clean up his knee a little bit. He was back at practice, did not participate in practice, and is still week to week, but definitely a good sign to keep him to get him back out there on the field with his teammates. And it seems like he's walking with a little bit of a limp, but didn't have a brace on his knee. So a lot of things going the right direction for Florida to get that guy on the field in week one, because you really need him on the field in week one. So a ton of different updates from around fall camp. Obviously, this is when injuries start to roll in. You hate to see it anytime it happens, but it's part of this game. You know, you got to make sure that you have guys behind the frontline guys that are ready to go, and frankly, that's probably what we'll talk about a lot in the next segment here. Another really interesting thing that happened in fall camp that I want to touch on a little bit here is something that was going around from Colorado a couple of days ago, where they thought they spliced together a clip. They don't need to do that for Shedeur Sanders. He can put the ball wherever he wants. I promise you that. It is not an issue to find really good highlights of Shedeur Sanders. They do not need to splice them together, and they did not in that scenario. So obviously, Colorado is a whole different conversation, which frankly we'll have tomorrow, because there are a lot of things going against that program that are a little bit ridiculous, and I obviously do not want to be a part of that. So I'll break it down on tomorrow's show, but let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to break down the players that have to make the most of fall camp. We just talked about some injuries. We're going to talk about some players that need to replace them this upcoming next couple of weeks. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the updates from fall camp. There are a ton of things going on, including some injuries, which we obviously hate to see, but you got to make sure you have some second and third line guys that are ready to roll, and frankly, that's what we're going to talk about right about now. There are some players that just have to make the most of the next couple of weeks as fall camp continues, and they're going to have to make big-time plays for their team as they head into this season. So let's get into these players real quick, and I'll start over in Tennessee. We talked about some of the injuries that they're facing. One, to Jordan Thomas, the very talented nickelback. it sounds like it's going to be Boo Carter in his place. This is a freshman that's incredibly athletic, a very, very talented kid, is likely already going to be a factor in the return game because he's just special with the ball in his hands, but this kid needs to step up huge in this back end, whether it's, taking him out of the return game to make sure he can focus on that more or what have you, I don't know, but at the end of the day, they have to make sure they have an elite nickel, because if they don't, this entire back end is going to look just not as good as it possibly could. I think they have a ton of really talented players out back there, but when you have a freshman kind of filling into a really, really important role on that back end, it definitely gives you a little bit of worry. Now, he has plenty of talent. There's no two ways about that, but you have to come a pretty long way over the next couple of weeks, and it might be as big of a couple of weeks for him as really anyone in the entire SEC. So definitely someone to watch. He's going to have an effect one way or the other. Let's hope it's a good effect for all the Vol fans out there. But I want to get into Cameron Seldon as well here. He is slated as the backup running back right now for the Vols, and it's because Dylan Sampson is kind of dealing with an injury, working his way back. Doesn't sound like it's going to be too big of an issue, but overall, you got to make sure you have another running back. When you talk about all of the elite offenses around the country, they have that change of pace back. Last year, it was Jaden Blue for Texas. It was, it's going to be someone like Roderick Robinson for Georgia this upcoming year, or Branson Robinson. So you have to have that second guy. You have to, whether it's a bruiser or someone that just has outright speed, you have to make sure you have that change of pace back, that third down guy that you can get the ball to and make sure he gets those couple of yards. Now, Dylan Sampson is going to be the story of this offense in the run game, but when you have someone right behind him that you feel confident in, like Cameron Seldon, you'll feel really great about your offense going forward, especially with some of the injury troubles that Sampson is dealing with. But let's move on to Oklahoma, and let's talk about a USC transfer that they got. A little payback on Lincoln Riley there, but they added a huge, huge piece to that offensive line at the left tackle position. Michael Tarquin is a very, very talented player, a very important player for this Oklahoma Sooner team. When you talk about this team, the O-line is where we all point, right? The O-line is the one that makes us all a little bit nervous. It sounds like they feel pretty good about both their tackle positions right now. Don't feel quite as good about their guard positions, but it definitely will be a huge thing if they can nail down this left tackle position, because overall, when we talk about college football, we talk about football in general, we put quarterback 1, we put left tackle 2. There's a reason for that. It's because quarterback is so important. So when you talk about a guy like Michael Tarquin, he's coming into a team that needs him. There's no two ways about that. They need him to play pretty much lights out from the get-go, and if they don't, it's going to be a relatively disappointing season for Jackson Arnold. But if you can protect this guy, the talent is off the charts for this kid, so cannot wait to see what he can do as long as Michael Tarquin can have a good couple of weeks heading into a very good season. And then Jaden Jackson is the other guy I want to talk about, a freshman defensive tackle. He's going to be called on early and often this year. There's no two ways about that. Him and David Stone, frankly, I think are going to play big-time snaps. I do like the front line they have with Dominic Williams and DeJoun Terry, but we've talked about how you need about 4 or 5 guys at that defensive tackle position, particularly in the SEC, to be able to compete the way that they want. So someone like Jaden Jackson, although he is a freshman, is going to have to walk in there, have a big-time camp, roll into the season, and feel really confident in his abilities, because they're definitely going to need him. They're going to need at least a couple other guys on that defensive front to step up, and from where I'm sitting at least, I think Jaden Jackson probably has the best chance to do that this upcoming year. LSU I want to talk about here for a second. I want to talk about Sage Ryan first, because the back end was just a mess a year ago, and Sage Ryan was a big piece of that. Let's just be totally honest. He has moved from safety to cornerback, and frankly, I think that's probably the better place for him, but regardless, he needs to take a big-time step forward. When you talk about this LSU back end, I don't think the talent level is the issue. When you have guys like Major Burns, Ashton Stamps, Sage Ryan, Javian Toviano, there's plenty of guys out there. There's guys to make plays. You need to make sure that the guy at the head of the snake, the leader of this team, the leader of that back end in particular, Sage Ryan, is as ready as you can possibly be. He needs to be the leader of that back end, and frankly, I think they can line up a pretty good group if they have him come along the way that they're hoping. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Obviously, that's only a piece of the puzzle, but I think it'd be a rather big one for LSU to get in place. I also want to talk about JVR Suggs, a very, very talented defensive lineman that LSU brought into the portal, or brought in from the portal in spring ball over from Grand Valley State. A very, very talented kid. Frankly, as I look at this team right now, the only defensive tackle that I really like is Jacoby and Guillory, and I think LSU fans would probably agree with me on that one. I do think this is a very talented kid and someone that could definitely step up into that other role next to Guillory, so definitely someone to watch. Jalen Lee is also another guy to watch around that, but they brought this guy in for a reason. They didn't get a ton out of the portal by any means. This is someone that needs to hit out of that portal position, and although he went to Grand Valley State and he's making that big time step up, this is a very talented physical player that absolutely could have a big effect on the season for the Tigers. But let's go over to Nebraska and let's talk about the guy that is filling in for Teddy Prohaka over at that left tackle position. It sounds like it is going to be Turner Corcoran, a very talented player, but he's getting the call from the bullpen for a reason. Definitely going to be a huge step up for him in terms of what he's asked to do, because left tackle is a whole different conversation than where he is right now, I believe, as the backup for the right tackle. So not necessarily the same game by any means. Definitely will be a huge thing. Protection is important for every team. I think we all understand that. When you can keep your quarterback upright, you're doing a lot of things right. But for Nebraska, it's outright mandatory this year. They cannot have Dylan Raiola be the guy that they want him to be while still being under pressure every second of every day. No freshman quarterback can handle that the way that they want him to. So right now, they need a solid left tackle. It is Turner Corcoran, and the next couple of weeks are going to be huge for this offensive line to take shape and make sure that their freshman quarterback goes in with as much confidence as you can possibly imagine. And that brings me to this guy. Dylan Raiola obviously has a huge couple of weeks ahead of him. When you talk about where they start the season, obviously week one's not too much of a worry, but week two, when you play Colorado at home, he's going to have to execute, and there's going to be so much talk around that game, so much pageantry, so much circumstance around that game that it's going to be a lot. It's going to get his head swimming just a little bit. If he can handle that and keep moving, you have to feel incredibly confident as a Nebraska fan, and frankly, I think they're expecting to win that game. So it'll be interesting to watch this kind of unfold. He's got to feel very, very confident right now because he's doing everything that they want him to do. So he's walking into the season as of right now really, really confident. Obviously, those big-time scrimmages that are coming up over the next couple of weeks will dictate that a ton, but this sounds like a kid that is going in with a ton of confidence, and they very much need that for Nebraska to succeed this upcoming year. Over to Oklahoma State here, Lyric Rawls is a very talented corner, or nickelback, that they're definitely going to need to rely on a little bit. They're a little thinner on the back end than everywhere else, although they're not really thin anywhere, if I'm being totally honest. So this was one of those things that was a little bit hard to decide because they have so many dudes that you could say any of them are important, or you could say they have too many dudes to where none of them really have to have a huge next couple of weeks and they'll be more than fine. But I think this guy is one that can totally open up things. I think this back end is really talented for the most part. I just think they need that guy to kind of bring everything together, maybe be that big time playmaker that has 4 or 5 picks this upcoming year. So this could be that guy. This could be the guy that kind of sets the tone for this defense and does a ton of really good work on that back end. And I think it starts with a couple of really big weeks here. And then we have Obi Ezigbo. I want to talk about him, a transfer from Gannon University. You likely do not recognize those jerseys, and that's for good reason. It's definitely a very, very small school that he is coming from, but still a very talented pass rusher. No two ways about it. A very, very talented kid that can make so many different plays for this team, and they're going to need it. They have a ton of different, things checked on that box, but I think pass rush is one of the areas that I'm just a little bit worried about for this team, and if Ezigbo can come along the way that they're hoping, they'll be more than fine in that position. So overall, I think you look at this Oklahoma State team, there's very few questions, which means there's not necessarily specific guys that really need to step up more than others, but if an injury does pop up, obviously that next guy in line will have to step up in huge ways. But as I look at it, I think this back end and this pass rush might be a little bit of worry going into this season for Oklahoma State, but these two guys could make that so much easier as they go into this season. And then we'll go over to NC State, and we'll start with an Ohio State transfer that came over. Jahad Carter is a very, very talented player, someone that they very much needed in the portal, and was one of my favorite late pickups in the portal at that nickelback position because they need someone to elevate that back end for NC State. You look at this team, and you love the offense. There's so many weapons on that offensive side of the ball. You look at the defense, and losing a guy like Peyton Wilson and having a back end that looks pretty good on paper, but isn't necessarily as, as experienced, as known as some of the other pieces on this team are. So overall, you don't want to get into a bunch of shootouts. You have to make sure your back end and your defense overall is in a really good spot going into this year. And I think this is going to be a huge player for them. He's going to be the kind of glue guy that puts it all together. And if he can be a really consistent player on this back end, they absolutely can be a really dangerous team in the ACC. And then you talk about the other big time void that needs to be filled. It's Sean Brown filling in for Peyton Wilson, and this one is a very, very interesting one because the reality is he was a free safety a year ago. He is moving down into a linebacker position where he's going to be asked to do a ton. Now he has the athleticism to break down in coverage to make all the plays that you need him to make in that respect. Rushing the passer might be a little bit of a trouble, but they seem to be very confident in this kid. If he can hit the way that they want him to, he's definitely going to be a huge player for them. When you have a guy like Peyton Wilson walk out of the program, you need someone to step up big, and this is going to be the guy playing in his spot, so he's going to have to step up big, even moving down from that safety position into the linebacker position. I think Sean Brown's about as important a player you could find on that Wolfpack roster, but it's obviously going to be a crazy conversation. There's so many different players that have to make big-time plays, and frankly, there's likely going to be a couple injuries that come out today and tomorrow that define a lot of the players that need to step up huge, but when you look at some of the injuries that have already happened, Book Harder stepping in for Jordan Thomas over at Tennessee is going to be huge. When you talk about Turner Corcoran stepping in for Teddy Perhaka at Nebraska at the left tackle, that's going to be massive for this team's success. So there's going to be a ton of other things that kind of come out over the next couple of weeks that are going to define the next couple of weeks for a couple of specific players. There will definitely be some guys that will kind of be added to this list, and we'll talk about them as we go on, but definitely a couple of players there that I just think really need to hit for that team, for those teams to have the success that they want to this upcoming year, because all the teams I just named can absolutely win their conference and go to the playoff if a couple of things go their way, including those players finding their groove. But obviously going to be an interesting thing to talk about over the next couple of days. We will continue getting into this tomorrow, likely finish it out tomorrow if I had to imagine, but let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a recruiting update, break down how Auburn is about to probably hit big at the quarterback market, and Texas A&M got huge commitments yesterday. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. I wanted to get into a little bit of a recruiting update after we got into some players that just need to have a big couple of weeks as they head into their season this upcoming year. But let's get into recruiting. Let's break down some of the big things happening around recruiting, and there are some big-time rumors that we have to get updated for you guys. Definitely some things that you're going to want to keep an eye out on in the recruiting trail over the next little bit. But let's start with some commitments that happened, and Texas got a huge one last night with Khalil Lockett, a 5-star wide receiver. He is committed to Texas, someone that they very much needed to pick up. They had been leading for him for quite some time, and they very much needed to lock this one down, get on the right foot as they enter August, and it could be a huge month for them. They are in for at least 4 5-stars this upcoming month, and we'll break them down at the end of the show, or at the end of this segment, excuse me. But this is a guy that they very much need, and they have another wide receiver at the end of this month in Jamie French that they are definitely turning their sights towards now. So a huge pickup for Texas, and one that is absolutely going to make a difference, maybe his first season as some of the players walk out that they brought in this past year. But let's move over to UCF, and let's talk about Javon Boggs. He was committed to he was committed to Missouri for quite some time. He is now flipped to UCF. He is from the Florida area, so definitely a huge pickup for this Central Florida team. I think when you look at this UCF team, they are picking up literally everything that they possibly could this cycle, and if they have an 8 or possibly even 9-win season, it could get really dangerous for everyone else in that state and for everyone in the Big Ten, because Gus Malzahn could do some really remarkable things, especially with that team having a huge year this upcoming year. So a huge pickup for them, someone that absolutely will play a part pretty early on, I would have to assume, but definitely one that could just be the beginning for UCF this upcoming cycle. And then you have Carday Smith, a very talented four-star offensive tackle. He is committed to USC. This is a pickup that they very much needed because you look at this USC team, it's all about just getting big bodies. It's all about just putting yourself in a position where you get off the bus more confident because you got bigger guys than the other team. And right now, that is not necessarily the case, but when you add someone that's 6'6", 285 at the offensive tackle position, it will pretty quickly. And if they can build him out a little bit more, possibly get up to about maybe 300 there, I think he'll be more than fine. This was a former Auburn commit, so stealing a guy from the state of Alabama from Auburn, never a bad thing by any means. A huge pickup for this team and definitely a guy that could play a big-time role his first year. And then finally, DJ Sanders, a four-star defensive lineman out of Belleville, Texas. He is committed to Texas A&M. This was kind of a Texas A&M battle for quite some time. A&M had held a lead for a little bit here, and that's kind of what Texas is facing with a new defensive line coach that you'll probably have to wait until some things are proven this upcoming year to really get some D linemen rolling into that class. But Mike Elko just got a huge pickup in this kid. This is someone that frankly could start right away for A&M next year. Definitely a player that is going to be huge for this team and I think is as big of a pickup in the state of Texas as really anyone. So a huge pickup there, definitely someone that A&M very much needed and likely will be a player for them in the future pretty soon here, honestly. And then you have Carson Snead. He is in the 2026 class, so just wanted to update you on what Tennessee is doing, and it's a lot of really good things. A 6'3", 235 tight end from Nashville, Tennessee. Likely was always going to Tennessee, but when you add someone like Faison Brandon, there's going to be talented kids that want to follow him. That's just the reality of this game. It's exactly what happened when Arch Manning signed with Texas. There were so many people that followed him right into that place, like Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore, so they're definitely going to get some really talented players. It's starting with a very talented tight end in Carson Snead. So definitely a huge thing for Tennessee, and they just continue to rack up big-time commits in that 2026 class. But let's move on to a couple of big-time intel questions, a couple of scheduled commitments at the end of this. But let's get into the behind the scenes, and there are so many quarterbacks that possibly could be on flip watch over the next little bit. And I want to start with Deuce Knight. He is the Notre Dame commit as of right now. Probably won't be the case too much longer if I had to imagine. Auburn is getting a ton of talk around this kid, and it was something that Auburn's been trying to do this for quite some time. They've been trying to flip a big-time quarterback commit. It started with Julian Lewis, then it moved to KJ Lacey, the Texas commit, for a little bit. Now it has moved to Deuce Knight, and it sounds like they are closing in pretty quickly on him. This is a huge, huge thing for Notre Dame because he was a huge recruiter for Notre Dame. He was there many times over the last little bit and was definitely a huge piece of them building out this remarkable class that they've been able to. They lose him, there's a possibility that they lose a couple others. So would be a huge hit for this Notre Dame class and this program overall, and would be a huge get for Auburn that just continues to rack in really, really talented guys. Another quarterback I'm watching very closely is the Texas A&M commit Hussein Longstreet, a very talented kid that just lit up the Elite 11 and made a lot of people know his name very quickly. This is a kid that it sounds like USC is turning up the heat very, very aggressively, and we'll get to why that is here in a second, but definitely would be a huge pickup for them. This is one of those just physically ridiculous kids at quarterback, definitely someone that if you put him in Lincoln Riley's offense, he could do some really special things at the college football level. So definitely would love to see this guy in pretty much any offense, frankly, because he could do really special things wherever he is. But if he gets with Lincoln Riley over at USC and flips from A&M, it could be a very special thing and could be that next Heisman quarterback for Lincoln Riley. But the reason that they are looking at him so aggressively is Julian Lewis, the guy that we've talked about probably 20 different times as being a flip possibility from USC. It sounds like it's still Colorado. It sounds like it's still that team over in Boulder that's making all of the big-time pushes for that quarterback, and it would be a huge pickup for this team. There's no two ways about that. When you have a guy like Shadur Sanders walking out the door that is that physically talented, you need to make sure you're replacing him with a kid that is at least close to that physically talented, and this is definitely one of those kids. I think he would start right away, and it would probably be a little bit of a learning curve, but the talent level is off the charts, and we'll see what happens, obviously. He definitely could still go to USC, but it's been trending away from USC for quite some time, and I think Colorado might just reap those benefits. But let's get into a couple of players that are down to just a couple of last schools. Andrew Marsh, a very talented 4-star wide receiver. He's down to 5 schools: USC, Michigan, Colorado, Washington, and Texas. A 6'2", 180 wide receiver out of Katy, Texas. This is one that I think I would lean Michigan right now. Michigan has been ahead for quite some time. It sounds like USC is pushing relatively hard. I'm not sure how much Texas is in this thing. I think they could very well be in this thing by the end, but we'll see what happens with a couple other wide receiver commits around there. And then I think Colorado is absolutely an option here. And Washington is absolutely an option. I think this year will definitely decide that a ton. And if Colorado can flip Julian Lewis, I think that could be a big-time moniker for them and a big-time, feather in their cap in this recruitment. So I definitely think this is a very talented player. I would lean Michigan right now, but there are so many teams nipping at their heels that I wouldn't necessarily feel too confident in that by any means. I think he's committing on August 20th. Yes, August 20th is the commitment there. So definitely one to watch out for there. And then you have a very talented offensive lineman, Nick Brooks, a 4-star offensive tackle. It sounds like he is down to 3 schools: Georgia, Texas, and USC. USC is staying in a lot of these big-time recruitments for players that they very much need. So gives you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes there. But it sounds like it's going to be an August 23rd or August 30th decision for this kid. Nothing is on the books as of right now, so that could change. But he did say he thought he'd be committed by now. So definitely will be one that you'll be on the lookout for the next couple of weeks. It feels like this is a Texas UGA battle. I would lean UGA as of right now, but I think this could change very, very quickly. USC absolutely is trying to change his mind and make sure that he gets on campus. But overall, I think it's Texas UGA as of right now, and we'll see if USC can throw their name into the hat a little bit later in the process and possibly lock this one down. But finally, I want to finish off with Josh Petty. We talked about him the last time we did a recruiting update. Georgia Tech continues to pick up big-time ground here, but it sounds like Florida State is losing ground and Ohio State is gaining a lot of ground coming into the field. So it might be a Georgia Tech versus Ohio State battle, which frankly usually goes to Ohio State. Let's just be totally honest. But it sounds like Georgia Tech and Brent Key are doing really, really good work here. And if they can bring him in, I think it would be the highest recruit in Georgia Tech history and would give them the best offensive tackle duo by a pretty comfortable margin in the 2025 class, because they just brought in the number 10 offensive tackle in this class. So if they bring in number 2, they'll be more than fine on that front. So a very, very talented kid, one that they absolutely love around Georgia Tech, but they also love him up in Columbus. So definitely will be one to watch and one that will define that class in so many different ways if he does end up at Georgia Tech. But let's get into a couple of players that will be committing over the next little bit. By the end of this month, we'll likely have most of the top 30 guys committed, and we'll likely know roughly where everyone's going to sit. Obviously, there will be some ers and ahs thrown in there throughout the season, but we'll know at least kind of the realm that everyone is going to sit in going into this season. And let's start with the number 3 player in the country, David Sanders, the number 1 offensive tackle in the country. He is committing August 17th at 2:30. It's Ohio State, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Georgia in this one, and there's plenty of different teams that have plenty to say. I think UGA would get my lean as of right this second, but Nebraska is getting closer and closer, and I absolutely love them as we get closer to that date. I think Tennessee's pushing really hard. Ohio State's right in there as well. So this might be one of the more unpredictable ones as we get closer, but definitely will be a huge pickup for whatever team gets him. The number 7 player in the country, Jonah Williams, a safety that is going to be hugely talented, is also very talented on the baseball diamond, but he's going to commit on August 24th at 1 p.m. This is one that it's Texas, Texas A&M, and OU. It is the 3 teams that hate each other more than you could possibly imagine, battling over this recruitment, and baseball is going to play a factor here. Obviously, all 3 of these programs have relatively good baseball programs. Texas and Texas A&M tend to be a little bit ahead of Oklahoma, at least history-wise, and what they're sitting right now. So definitely will be one to talk about as we get a little bit closer, but it sounds like there's a ton of buzz around Texas. I would lean A&M as of right this second. Maybe OU can make some noise, but overall, I think it's going to be one of those that goes down to the absolute wire. Then the number 14 player in the country, Josh Petty, we talked about him. He will be committing this Saturday, I believe, at noon, so definitely one to watch there. We will definitely be on the lookout for that. Actually, next Monday. Apologies there, but a very talented kid nonetheless. Definitely one to watch. The number 25 player in the country, Jamie French, a really, really talented receiver. August 30th at 2 p.m. is when he'll make his announcement. It sounds like it's all Texas at the moment. Now, Miami is doing everything they possibly can to flip this kid. So definitely one to watch. This is a Florida kid, so definitely one that Miami could possibly pull off. And if they can, that would be a huge pull for them. And Texas would be left a little bit reeling. But as of right now, I'd lean towards Texas. Definitely could change as we get a little bit closer. But the number 27 player in the country as well will be committing this month. Michael Fasusi, a very talented offensive tackle. August 21st at 6 p.m. is when he will make his choice. And it sounds like Oklahoma is doing really, really good work here. This was kind of an A&M Texas battle for quite some time. And then Oklahoma came in and really might have launched themselves up to the very top of this recruitment. So as of right now, I'd probably lean towards Oklahoma. I think a ton of stuff can change over the next little bit. And this is one of those recruitments that is going to be a little bit all over the place, but whoever gets him is getting a big-time offensive tackle that could play pretty much right away at any of these schools. So definitely will be something to watch there. And then you add in 5 stars, Elijah Griffin, Andrew Babalola. I think Michael Terry is going to commit this month. So there are so many different guys across the country, especially 5 stars, that will be committing over the next couple of weeks into the next month, and it's going to be a really fun one. It's going to find this cycle in a lot of different ways, so we'll obviously break it down as this stuff starts to unfold and the craziness begins. But let's take our last break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about some conference questions, get into the ACC today. We've done the Big Ten and the SEC already, so ACC's turn this time around. We'll break down some of the big questions I have around that conference right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down all of the updates you need to know in the world of recruiting. So many things happening in the recruiting trail right now, and a couple of flips that could be coming up for some big-time quarterbacks in this class. But let's get into some conference questions. Let's break down the ACC today. I believe 5 questions here that I want to break down for you guys and get into all the details as we head into this ACC season. But let's start over at Clemson. And my big question is, can Clemson be the team that they used to be? Can they be the team that is at the very top of this conference, is scary to essentially everyone in this conference, and is dominating from the front? And overall, when you look back at those 2010, those dominant programs those dominant teams that Clemson had for so long, it was defined by a couple of things. When you look at the outside wide receiver play, it was always elite. A quarterback that is among the best in the country, and then line of scrimmage physicality. That was what they kind of built that program off of, and it feels like this year they have it a little bit more than they've ever they've had at least in a while. When you talk about bringing guys like Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore into that program, those are 2 very, very talented kids that immediately elevate that room, immediately give them more talent, more ability to work with, and I think regardless of how I feel, putting a freshman at the very forefront of your offense, I think if they're talented enough, right? They definitely have the ability to make that work, and I think they're going to be a really dominant group this upcoming year and a little bit closer to what we remember back in 2016, 2018 when we talk about those Clemson wide receivers. The line of scrimmages are back to being dominant in my mind. The D-line looks really, really solid, especially better than it did last year. Definitely a really, really good group, and Peter Woods is someone that I think is just going to be an absolute monster this year. And then the O-line is much more solid this upcoming year. They have 2 really, really good tackles, and I think they're going to be more than fine, especially with Matt Luke coaching that position. I think they're going to make plenty of plays at the offensive line position and be one of those groups across the ACC that can dictate the momentum, dictate the line of scrimmage better than pretty much anyone else. But then there's the biggest piece, and it's Cade Klubnik. And I've kind of come around on Cade Klubnik a little bit. I think he's one of the more underestimated quarterbacks in the entire country. I think when you look at this kid's tools, he can run the ball. He can throw the ball pretty much wherever you need him to throw it. Now, the question is, can he do that consistently? That's obviously the big-time question, which with pretty much every quarterback in the ACC I've found out, but overall, this is definitely one that might take the cake in this one. But when you talk about all of the things that he's dealt with since he's gotten into Clemson, he came in as a freshman, started in spurts as that DJU craziness was going on at Clemson. Then you immediately lose your OC, who he probably should have lost, to be totally fair, but it doesn't change. You had to learn an entirely new offense that absolutely can be quarterback friendly, but it's not easy to run by any means. So Cade Klubnik can definitely take that step forward, and with the talent he has, there is a chance for this kid to be special and lead Clemson right back to where they want to be. So there's going to be plenty of teams that they have to run through to get there, but I really like this team, and I think they're a little bit closer to what we remember Clemson being during those dominant runs in the 2010s. But let's move on to the other team up top in the Florida State Seminoles. Are they the class of the ACC now, is the question that I have, and it will be solidified this upcoming year, because Florida State's kind of a funny team heading into this year when you talk about all the hype around Miami, all the hype around Clemson kind of getting back up to the top. A team that went undefeated is probably not getting talked about quite enough as the Florida State team is right now. So I think I have worries about this team. I've been very open about that with DJ. Just don't feel overly confident in that offense running the way that they want it to. Doesn't change that the head coach has every ability to put him in really good spots. Mike Norvell has done an incredible job, no matter what quarterback he has, at making sure that kid is in winning situations. And that's the end-all be-all for DJ. When you look at what he can do this upcoming year, the talent is there. The arm talent is really, really incredible. He can run the ball. He can do a number of different things on the football field. He's got to be more consistent in the passing game when you talk about completion percentage. And Mark Norvell does a great job of that. Whether it's screen just to get him out of get the ball out of his hands very quickly, make sure he's getting a rhythm going. Whether it's quick slants that just make him feel really confident, or it's throwing it up to ridiculous wide receivers that can make pretty much any play on the field. He's gonna have plenty at his disposal. And I think when you look at this Florida State team, this is their chance to kind of plant their flag. This is their chance to show everyone in the ACC that this is their conference. It's no longer Clemson's. It's no longer anyone else's. Florida State is right there in that conversation. And although last year was a huge moniker for that, and the last 2 years really were a huge moniker for that, this is the year where you really solidify that. And if you do something big this year, Clemson might have to dip into the portal to get to keep up with you with what they can do on the recruiting trail. So definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. I think the Noles know how important this upcoming season is, and we'll see if they can execute this upcoming season. But I want to get into Miami here for a second, and just curious if this is hype or all of this is really real. And I think when you talk about this team, everyone, I kind of dismiss this question because I do think they're real, and it's because of the guy on the screen right there. Cam Ward is an absolute monster. He immediately elevates your team the second he steps in on campus, and there's a reason he was picked ACC Player of the Year and made a lot of people mad. Let's just be totally honest. So it's definitely one of those things that he is an elite player, definitely will elevate this team at least a little bit. The question is how much. I do think the O-line has every ability to compete with any D-line that they're going to face. The running back duo is one of the best, probably the best in the conference. The wide receiver group might be the best in the conference as well. So you have tons of game changers on the offensive side of the ball, and then you got Ruben Bain on the defensive side. And that's a group that I think does need to come quite a long way this upcoming season. But when you have a game record like that, you feel pretty good about your chances on the defensive side of the ball. I do think my big-time worry about Miami going into this year is, frankly, Mario Cristobal. I do think he's a fantastic coach. I think he's going to have a really good year, but there have been some times in the past where he's been a little bit micromanaging. He's been a little bit kind of all over his play callers and not allowing them to really open the playbook the way that they want to, and it's led to a couple losses, including that Georgia Tech loss a year ago where it got away from him. A lot of different things went wrong, and he made a lot of bad decisions in that game. So definitely will be a thing to watch throughout the season. They have all the pieces. All the talent level is definitely where it needs to be for them to compete for the ACC, win it, and possibly go to the playoffs. So everything is there. There's no two ways about that. You could miss the mark. There's no two ways about that either. But overall, I think when you look at this team, I tend to believe it's a little bit more real than hype, but it definitely could change very quickly in that Week 1 matchup against Florida. Then we go into how many teams can really win the conference outside of the three that I just talked about? We have Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. We know that they're setting the pace. We know that they are the best teams in this conference, and we know that they're the favorites to get into that conference championship. So the question is, how big is the gap between those three and everyone else? Is that, this monstrous gap that kind of feels like what's going on in the Big Ten right now with those four teams up top and everyone else? I don't necessarily think anyone outside of those four has a shot. I don't think that's the case in the ACC, though. I do have Virginia Tech in my title game, so obviously I don't think that. I do think someone like Kyron Drones can be a total difference maker for this team, but you have other teams as well. I think an NC State team that could put it together, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, but also they need some players on the defensive side of the ball. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch. All of these teams obviously have to have more go for them than the other teams on this list with Miami, Clemson, and Florida State. They have a little bit more wiggle room because of the talent level that they have, because of all of the ability they have all over the field. They don't necessarily have to worry about this quite as much, at least walking that tightrope that I talk about so much. So Virginia Tech and North Carolina State, they're walking a tightrope. There's no two ways about that. But they are two teams that I think if they can get it together, if they can put everything together the way that they want to, particularly with a guy like Kyron Drones at Virginia Tech or Grayson McCall at North Carolina State, I think they can absolutely get into the championship game and absolutely can make an effect on this conference this upcoming season. So overall, I think the big time question I have is once they get there, can they really win that game? When the chips are down, can they play the way that they need to play against that elite offensive line for Clemson or elite offensive line for Miami? Or elite offensive line for Florida State. So that's kind of the big time difference is you're getting to the end of a 12-game season. You're playing that 13th game, and you're facing up against likely one of the most talented teams in your conference, and one that, particularly on the line of scrimmage, probably has a relatively sizable gap. Not necessarily anything crazy, but definitely one that will have an effect on this game. So that's the big time question, not can they get there, because I think there are plenty of teams that can get there, including SMU, I think could possibly get there this upcoming year. But when the chips are down, they have to make a play. Can they handle the physicality of those three teams will definitely be something to watch as we get closer to that date. But let's get into the playoff, and let's talk about how many ACC teams can make the playoff. I think we just talked about the three up top. Miami, FSU, and Clemson already can absolutely make it to the playoff. There's no two questions about that. Now, there's a little bit of worry with that because Clemson plays Florida State. Florida State plays Clemson and Miami. Miami plays Florida State. So there's going to be a little bit of roughing themselves up here. And then Miami gets off a little bit nicely, only having to play Florida. Otherwise, that is really going to be a big time, probably a game that they're going to be in a little bit danger for. And then you have Florida State. They play Clemson, Florida, Miami, Notre Dame. Clemson plays UGA, Florida State, South Carolina. So there's plenty of games on these schedules that could trip up these three teams. I'd be a little bit surprised if it was these three teams that made it from the ACC, if three teams make it at all. I think there are some people that are saying it's only going to be the conference champion, and I totally understand that. I believe I had three teams in there from the ACC, and I already don't necessarily love it too much. I had Miami, Virginia Tech, and Florida State, so definitely will be a really interesting thing, and one of those things that Notre Dame could come into this conference and totally shake everything up. If they beat Florida State, then Florida State's in a really tough spot going forward. So it's definitely going to be one of those really interesting things to watch, and I think you have a number of different teams that can make some noise, but at the end of the day, it's really going to define, or what's going to define this is how the Big 12 plays out, how Notre Dame plays out. If they, become those dominant teams and the Big 12 has two 11-1 teams heading to their championship, it's likely that the ACC only gets one team in. Let's just be totally honest. But if Notre Dame struggles and they don't find their way in, or if the Big 12 is really cannibalistic and there's only one team that gets in from there, maybe the ACC has a door opening to be a two-team, three-team bid type conference, and definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch. But overall, I think you have tons of teams that could be playoff level. A couple of things have to go their way, but when you look at how many teams could really make it, I think one's probably where I would fall, maybe two. It's definitely one of those things that this will be defined more by what happens outside the ACC than probably what happens in it. So definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch there. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people covering everything you possibly want. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered on the world of sports. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.